Transformation is having an entirely different relationship with the same content. And then everything looks totally different.
Yeah, I think you've coined the phrase that most people think they have a personality, but in reality, it's a personality disorder.
Yes, I have said that.
I mean, I wanted to talk about that because I think we talked about noise on the last segment, and really, out of noise, you start unraveling what noise shows up in different parts of your life, and then the next thing you really have step on is all these identities that you start having. You start discovering you have identities in all these different places where you have noise. And so I wanted to talk about identities today, the identities that people carry around with them, the way that they want to be seen or the way they don't want to be seen. And I wanted to...
You can't just introduce that like blah, 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 blah.
Well,
Brian, you understand, I know, but you're like saying like, oh,
so let's talk about
everyone
identities.
speaks Spanish or something or Japanese. So, all right, so let me... So
there's lots to unpack in this one,
okay,
right?
so
let's start with
So let's talk about identities. So, So first of all, I introduced the whole notion of what has you and what do you have. And I think we're going to have to really open that up because I think that's such a significant part of people's relationship to life. Like what holds them hostage and what do they actually have? So an identity is a way you want to be seen or a way you do not want to be seen. And so, you might want to be seen as creative. You can't be seen as not creative. You want to be seen as talented. You can't be seen as boring. You want to be seen as attractive. You can't be seen as unattractive. You want to be seen as funny. You can't be seen as disinteresting, right? You want to be seen as someone who's formidable rather than someone who's dismissible. So those are identities. And we walk through life driving these kinds of, I'm not going to call them intentions, but I'm going to call them affects, the need to be seen as something or the need to not be seen as someone. You better not call me stupid or I better not be seen as stupid. Right? And how you know you've got an identity is where you're defensive, where you're reactive, like where like you're like, what the hell? Like, or you're upset, and you might not be expressing that upset, but then you're managing that upset. You're not showing that, but you're in the throes of being upset all the time about not being seen in a particular way.
Yeah, I've used that because I've realized that I got lots of identities. I want to be cool, I want to be liked, I want to be loved, right? Like I have all these things in play that cause all sorts of weird behaviors. Right?
Yeah.
Like even on this podcast 30 seconds ago, I'm thinking about, is this going to look okay? Is this going to be all right? Right. And those identities are fully in play about me wanting to be seen a particular way.
That's why I don't have you speak too much.
That's why you put me in the back corner.
Exactly. There's a reason for this, right? So let me just jump in about, what an identity is. Again, an identity is a way you want to be seen or a way you do not want to be seen. And I don't think I need to go through all of the extrapolations because I just did that, right? Yeah. I think we have that, right? And that whole simple concept of what has you and what do you have is part of that. But absolutely to your point that if we look at noise as the fuel, the engine, if you will, and identities are the affect, right, that come out of it, right, that are driven from noise, right? So noise is kind of like the soil, the toxic soil, right, that drives identities. So an identity can be anything, as I said, just like you mentioned, like a couple of them, right? And so understanding what your identities are is the key to everything because you want to dismantle those identities. So if we're looking at the way the culture is looking to see how they can have more of an identity and become more of something when in fact, what you're looking for is to dismantle that, to become more nothing. I know it sounds like a strange concept, right? But this is all counterintuitive and counterculture, that instead of becoming more of something, you want to become less of something. And the more you become less of something, the more you become, all things. Like if you become no thing, you have the possibility of being all things. So this is really the essence and behavior conversation as well. The more you become less of something, because identities are behavioral, and behaviors can change. right? Essence doesn't change, but behaviors can. Like you can stop smoking and, maybe you can stop obsessing. And certainly there's ways that you can intervene in that, or that you can stop going over the same thing over and over again based on anxiety, where you're repeating things over and over. So behaviors can change and you can intervene in behaviors, right? But given that we collapse our essence and our behaviors, or conflate the two, that it's not easy to see what's essence and what's behavior. But dismantling the identities is part of the work.
Well, it's pulling all that apart. It's pulling apart what the essence is, what the behavior is, what's driving those behaviors.
I have a very abstract example. It's not easy. I don't think it's an easy thing for people to grok.
Okay.
I don't know if people even remember the term From Stranger in a Strange Land, right? That Heinlein science fiction book that was so brilliant, right? But the term grok was to understand, to integrate. It's very much of a 60s term, right? I don't know if...
it's a cool term, actually.
It's a very cool term.
In
terms of understanding.
So even if you haven't heard of it, maybe I'm going to steal it. It's a cool term.
It is a cool term, right?
Yeah.
And so... the way you dismantle an identity is first you've got to recognize that you have one. So the way that the arc of evolution, all evolution starts with there's ignorance. You don't even know there's an issue. So this is my personality. This is why we talked about personalities and personality disorders. Oh, this is just the way that I am. I'm drinking a bunch and I'm really fun and right. So it's not even an issue. This is just the way it is, right? Ignorance moves to arrogance, right? Oh yeah, I'm drinking and I'm just using drinking. I can use like different identities, right? I'm just using that, right? Because drinking could have to be being socially awkward and needed to be fun. I need to be seen as fun, right? Or outwardly, engaging or secure. I don't know. People use drinking for all different reasons, right? We'll talk about pathologies and drugs in a bit. So it goes from ignorance to arrogance. Yeah, I'm fun and I like to drink and that's making me fun and on. So ignorance to arrogance to avoidance, right? Like, I know I got this issue. I know I got this problem. I don't want to work it out. Shit. You're in the struggle of it to some sort of breakdown. So let's say now it's a DUI or you hit something or something happens, right? So it goes ignorance, arrogance, avoidance, breakdown. And most people reset back to ignorance.
Yeah, they just reassemble their lives.
They just reassemble their lives.
Yeah.
So it goes ignorance, arrogance, avoidance, breakdown. In the evolutionary move, it goes to creation and then contribution.
Which means you're doing something different, right? You're creating a new...
Well, you're alchemizing the dysfunction into a function.
A contribution to something that actually it does something different in the world other than create bad outcomes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it literally is alchemizing it from from a dysfunction to a function. And so that's where, now you're sponsoring other people or, you're now become a coach, of a sober coach or whatever it would be that. And
that story about getting pulled over by the DUI now contributes to someone hopefully not getting to that DUI.
Yeah, Hey, if life was just, which it's not, we'd have drunk people running over pedophiles or we'd have drunk people running over serial killers, right? But it never works out. They're always running over pregnant women and children, right? So you understand? Yeah. So life is not just, right? So that's the arc of evolution. So if we take this in terms of an identity, right? That instead of it being your personality, and this is just the way it is, and you see the disorder, it comes out of the ethers. So let's say I need to be seen as smart, and I've got all this defensive things, and I'm doing all these affects, and I'm pretending that I'm smart, and I'm doing all these affects and stuff. You're seeing that something has you, and it's in first position, right? Mm-hmm. And it could be a benefit, like, it's all about money. It's all about money. It's all about this, or it's all about being liked, or it's all about popularity. Something is locked in first position when it's an identity. It means it's the whole story. It takes up an enormous amount of space in your life, and you organize around that pretty much. And
you're collecting all of that. Like, the more friends I have, the more popular I am. The more love,
Oh no, it's gathering a ton of evidence to support its pathology, but it's locked in first position. When you're dismantling this thing that's locked in first position, you're watching this thing now. It's moved out of the ethers, out of the background into a peripheral place, and then into the foreground where you can see it. I remember I had this identity. I'll use myself. I'll throw myself on my own sword, right? I remember I had this identity where I'm so competitive. I had to be the guy all the time. So someone said, "Hey, I was playing golf." I'm going, "Yeah, I was playing golf yesterday. I like blah, blah, blah." I'd have to one up someone every time they spoke, right? And then it was crazy. And
That's so hard to believe.
I know. Shocking as it may be, it was true. And so I had this compulsion, and I then thought, how do I have any friends with this kind of personality disorder, which is so bizarre, right? So I literally then got it out of the ethers, got it out into a peripheral place, and then put it into the foreground because it was.
But you're like counting, right? Like how many times?
Well, let me get to that part, right? So it was locked in like position. Like it had me. I was consumed by this behavior. So I then went, you know what? I'm going to count out how many times I do this a day. And I mean the subtle times, the dramatic times, all the moments. It was like 700 times a day. It was like something, it was something extreme. I'm like, you've got to be kidding, right? So the way you dismantle something is through observation. Rather than trying to change it, I didn't try and change it.
Yeah.
I just observed it until it kind of became vapor, it got diffused so much. It moved out of first position into a background, into somewhere now is the foundation of life, right? So it became something, and then something else moves into the first position again.
The next identity.
So the next identity comes in, and then you dismantle that, and that's what life looks like. You're constantly paring away. And what it feels like to you is that you're in free fall.
Yeah.
Like you feel like you're on your way to nothing.
There is no me. Like
you have no personality at all.
There's nothing left.
But how you occur to the world, because you're getting less and less noise, is you've got more dimension, more substance, more qualities, more characteristics, all of that.
Well, and one of the things I want to talk about is where people go wrong in that, because you'll get to the point where it goes to the foreground and then you start managing it because you think the management, if I can just get rid of this, or if I can manage this, or like, you start, using those techniques, it just falls apart from there. I call this
the Siegfried and Roy of development. And why I call it that is this it has all these combinations: identity, noise, disorder, your survival system. I talk about these in all different ways. Well, first, the personality disorder is just feral. It's just, kind of like a lion, taking down antelope on the African plain, whether it's hungry or not. It's just feral. That's how this animal works. And that can include making billions of dollars. That can include like needing to accumulate tons of stuff, dominating, like whatever the survival looks like. And your survival system is fueled by fear and shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just dominating. So it's feral. Because it becomes problematic in the world, you then do what you just said. You put it into a 4x6 cage, right? I'm trying to manage this thing. So now you have this insane system that's now being managed, right? It's like managing terror and anger and rage, right? And it's just contained, and then it blows up, and it's made crazy, right? The evolution of it is like, oh, I'm going to work with this white tiger, with these these animals, right? Just like Siegfried and Roy, right? Like even at the end of his life, when I don't know, it was Siegfried or Roy who got mauled, right? He said, he never blamed the tiger. He said, no, the tiger was trying to save me. So he never was a victim of it. And look how much millions and millions of dollars those guys made with white tigers, because they knew how to work with them. They knew how to create with them. They knew how to, they made an entire show out of that. And so that's what it is to like have your survival system, work with your survival system, create with it, where it moves out of identity, because identities have you, qualities and characteristics you have. So let me just like frame this up. I know this is like a lot. It can be a lot, and it's it can be abstract, and it's not easy to track.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this, right? We're going to keep talking about it, keep jumping in on it.
But I'm just saying, understanding, the constructs of this, right? And how to dismantle it, kind of what the arc of it, these concepts are like, becoming less of something actually has you occur as more of something. All these counterintuitive physics, is what we're looking at, So
when I go back to the basics of what I came in with, which is, like in me and intimate relationships, I had a lot of noise about, oh, it's all about them. I don't matter. They don't care, which then manifested as I need to be cool. I need to be liked. I need to be loved, which then when I went out into the world, because it was an identity, it wasn't actually really authentic. I'm more of an awkward kind of intellectual kind of guy. Then it came across as very inauthentic and very awkward and it was a repellent, right? Those identities actually repelled, and created the very situation I didn't want, which is to be rejected.
Yeah, which is the very nature of the thing. The very thing you don't want is actually happening.
So the noise created the identities that I was trying to be or not wanting to be. And then I was going out and trying to be those things. They self-fulfilled. And basically I got what the noise was saying was that no one liked me, no one loved me, that I wasn't cool enough, that I wasn't going to be good enough. That was all about them. It wasn't about me. And that lesson for me in intimate relationship was really tough because I wasn't trying to accept it. I was trying to manage it. I was trying to get rid of it. I was trying to jettison it and not go, oh, I just have, not enough as part of who I am as an animal. Like that's it. And I got to figure out how to work with that. Like that, I need to know where I'm vulnerable.
So let me talk about how to work with that, right?
Yeah.
So as I said, identities have you. So we're looking at what has you and what you have. So identities have you. I'm going to say transformation again. So transformation is having an entirely different relationship with the same content. And then everything looks totally different. Right? So like perspective.
So I'm not getting rid of that. But now it's part. I'm going to have a different relationship to not enough and how that shows up in my life.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to try to put it in practical terms.
Thank you. I'm doing just fine over here.
Then keep talking.
Yeah. So, okay. Understood that. So if noise, Brian, if noise comes into your head that tells you, you should speak now. Like there's this little voice saying, no, this is time for you to speak. Just ignore it. Just don't. Just like let it go. All right. So now, so
where were we?
Yeah, I know exactly where we are. That's how come I'm running this thing. So identities have you and qualities and characteristics you have. So what does that mean? That means if loyalty is an identity, that means you need to be seen as a loyal person. Now that sounds like a strange thing. Like, well, wouldn't you want to be seen as a loyal person? No. The point is that does it have you or do you have it? So you never want to be seen as something that has you, that holds you hostage, regardless of how good it looks. That's the nature of the work, some of the work that we're talking about. Regardless of how good this looks to the public, if it has you, if the relationship is that it has you, it's problematic. It creates problems that you can't quite see. Even if it's working today, it will back up on itself tomorrow. So loyalty to a fault is an identity. It's where you stay in situations long after you should because you need to be seen as a loyal person.
Yeah.
So now things are like you're in bad situations, and loyalty to a fault will end up being resentful and ultimately bitter. And bitter is an irrecoverable state. No one comes back from bitter. I don't care what programs you take. I don't care what drugs you take. Once you're over that continental shelf of bitter, you're history. And we all know someone who's bitter.
Yeah, I was thinking in my mind, I was like, oh, that person fell off the shelf.
That's right. We all know two or three people who are bitter and they're fucked.
We already went there.
Right. So, yeah. So, and loyal to a fault, I said moves into, and if you're loyal to a fault, what do you absolutely have to have? Betrayal. They are complicit. They work together. So loyalty as a quality or a characteristic is great because you have it rather than it has you. It's creative, it's generative, it's innovative, it knows who to ally to, it has intelligence, it knows who not to be loyal to. It has a multidimensional intelligence, right? So remind me to bring up superstitions and intuition, right?
Yeah.
So that is really essential to know. Oh, what has you is different, is an identity. What you have is a quality. So generosity to a fault can be an identity. Generosity as a characteristic is something that you have. So you know who to be generous with and who to loan money to and who to invest in and where to go, as opposed to just being like you have to be seen as generous, which then becomes sacrificial, right? Which then also is on its way to bitter. So all those things are headed somewhere. as a dysfunction. So understanding qualities and characteristics like creativity and innovation and connection and play and hundreds of qualities and characteristics and, kindness and heart, all depending on the relationship. If they have you, they're dysfunctional and problematic. If you have them, they're creative and expressed, and they open up a whole other world of contribution.
Yeah, and I love these conversations. I learn in every one of these conversations. And I was thinking about my own in sacrifice, right? And like how sacrifice shows up as an identity. And you said generosity. And I was like, generosity, I wouldn't have thought sacrifice would have shown up as generous, but it does, right? And because if I'm overly generous, I give too much of myself and I burn myself out, then I fall into sacrifice.
Into a sacrificial state.
And I completely live that out in my life. So, I mean, and is on the opposite side of that, when I'm in service, right, is when I'm taking care of myself and I'm, making sure that I'm taken care of first before I give myself to others, right? And I'm not allowing that overextension of myself and sacrifice.
Yeah, and you also know that you have to be taken care of. Like if you look at generosity and then how it translates or transforms into service, right? Based on if you have generous to a fault, and what does it look like when you have generosity? It looks like service. It looks like contribution. It looks like connection. It looks like, who, where to go, what to give, who to give it to, right? It's a whole other, expression.
So one of the most important identities which you prompted me on was intuition and superstition. And this is, it seems like it's ubiquitous. It seems like we all have this.
Yeah, we all have that.
In some degree, right? So talk about that in more detail, intuition and superstition, how that shows up in people's lives.
Am I talking about that as a core confusion?
We can introduce core confusions because I think as a seed, like we'll talk about core confusions as the conversation in the next shows and the shows ahead, because the identity conversation, how to dismantle your identities, one of the key portals you came up with was core confusions. And using core confusions to help you get into those identities and be able to pull them apart, knowing when you're on the right side of the tracks, when you're on the wrong side of the tracks. And so that's a big conversation. So I want to maybe park core confusions as a topic for another show. But the identity itself.
Well, I can't quite introduce intuition and superstition without introducing a core confusion.
Okay, well, introduce it and then we'll tackle more.
Fine,
on the next.
okay,
Let's
all right.
do that.
So a core confusion.
Yeah.
It's something I invented and created, a while ago, and as a structure. And we'll talk more about it, obviously, as a structure for people, for liberation and creation, right? For people to get into. So they had more access to their own liberation and their own creativity and self-expression. So a core confusion is something that looks exactly like something else but has an entirely different effect. So what would that mean? What would that look like? So arrogance and confidence would be a core confusion. Arrogance and confidence look exactly the same, and yet they have an entirely different effect. Arrogance repels and confidence attracts. And everyone has one or two or three core confusions that they live from. And the reason they're called confusions is because they don't have them distinguished out. They're just like, oh, this is just the way that I am.
Yeah, they see as part of their personality.
This is part of my personality, rather than, no, this is you when you're confident and this is you when you're arrogant, right? So they're very, very different, right? So a universal, ubiquitous one, as you said, is intuition and superstition. That belongs to everyone. Most people confuse superstitions with intuition. They think their intuition is superstition. They think their superstitions are intuition. They're not. A superstition always is something that's singular. It attaches itself to something singular. Like, hey, the plane's going to crash. Hey, we're going to run out of money. She's going to leave me. Oh, you're going to have an affair on me. It attaches itself to something singular. Now, it can move around to what it's going to attach itself to, but it's not attaching itself to multiple conversations at the same time. It's not going, the plane's going to crash and I'm going to run out of money. It's always singular in nature where it's attaching itself. And it's always bad. Always bad.
Doom and gloom.
Yeah, doom and gloom. So that's how you know it's a superstition. It's not intuition. Intuition is got multiple looks at things. It soars at 35,000 feet. It can see all aspects of something. It's very, very, very different. So when we confuse our superstitions with intuition, it's problematic. And I use this all day long. I'm going, oh, it's singular and it's bad. So stop subscribing to this. Stop thinking you've got intuition. And it really makes a huge difference when you are distinguishing things out like that, so that you know what side of the tracks you're on. So you know what optics to use when something's going on, right? So
well, it's giving you those, like, so we talked about noise, and that noise shows up, that you're not in your essence, you're in your behaviors, right? And when identities are in play, right? So if you have something you're trying to be or something you're not trying to be, which usually it stems from the noise, it's coming from the noise is generating it. And in core confusions, that's really where those identities have taken up real hold in your life in a particular area, and where they've really anchored themselves. So for me, service and sacrifice is anchored in my core, and it's been part of my life since I came into this world. I've come in with that.
And that's a core confusion, service and sacrifice. And sacrifice is repellent and service is contribution. And so understanding that everyone has one or two or three core confusions that they live from, and your life looks different if you're living from the positive side, or the optimum side of the street. It just looks different, and people go, I don't know why shit's working today and it's not working. Well, it also you got to know when your head's up your ass. That's like the soil and the noise. You got to kind of know when that's happening. And that's not an easy thing for people to recognize. And it's more of a physical sensation, really physically feeling when your head's up your ass. And most people are so conditioned to living with their head up their ass, they don't know when it's out or when it's in.
Well, I was going to talk about that during the noise, is that there's some noise which is very blatant. It's very clear. Like, I've got a lot of noise about this. Like, I'm in a relationship that maybe my partner, I'm assuming they're cheating on me, like I'm going out of my mind. And those ones are pretty tough to miss. There's usually a big breakdown. But then there's the subtle stuff you talk about, the things that you don't even notice that just chew away on you every day. When you wake up, think, oh, I'm not going to find love today. Like, there's just little statements that might prompt your life that you end up living from. And it plays
absolutely.
Out. And those ones tend to be the most damaging.
Yeah, it's the subtle. Well,
it's the subtle things.
It's the subtle ones that you can't see. I mean, like we kind of know when we're in the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, when things are going really wrong.
Right, but the shallow end is where the subtleties are the ones that, a Nain rug, a Persian rug, is like they're worth millions of dollars, and the reason is because it's about the knots. There are 150 knots per square inch. And but they're looking at the design rather than the knots. And so in this work, we're looking at those knots that make up this design. And if we start to get hold of the end of that thread, it can unravel that. And that's what we're looking like, oh, let me just get hold of one thread and I can unravel the whole design, right? That's been so in place. And it's disruptive and it's disconcerting for people, as I said, to completely dismantle something that they've taken years and years and years to put together and been successful with. But I also call this, I used to call it the Mel School of Arrested Development, right? That, hey, Mel in 1985 is different than Mel in, 2022, right? Or 2023, right? Different, right? Because he, didn't evolve beyond that, kept, maintaining the same identity, the same system, right? And then it backs up on itself. I'm now calling it the Johnny Depp School of Arrested Development, right? As opposed to could this guy get a few more bangles, right? And Rihanna just hired him, like she's getting all this shit for like hiring him for some fashion thing.
So I've loved today's. I mean, identity is such a key part of the conversation. So I think what we should do in the next series or section is to talk about more about dismantling identities and some of those portals, like core confusions. Okay. And starting to introduce some of that. Because the story that you come in with. Could you
speak a little faster? Because I don't think anyone's, what is this crazy?
Should I slow
this down, Brian? People are trying to understand what the hell you're saying.
Are you my noise? Are you the physical manifestation of my noise?
Are you my conscience?
Are you my conscience right now?
Basically.
Okay, I'll slow down.
Yeah.
So
my daughter started calling me Ellen. She goes, Dad, you're looking like Ellen. I go, that's fucking not true.
You look like Ellen?
I said, yeah. She's saying I look like Ellen. It's the most annoying fucking thing. She's saying it in public, and now people are thinking, oh my God, he does. When someone starts to tell you that shit, then it starts to happen, right? And so I'm now doing Dory from yes, I'm your conscience from, Finding Nemo.
You're finding impersonations.
I am. I'm now actually accessing this whole thing.
Now you have an Ellen identity. It's taking up precedence.
I'm going to start dancing around somewhere.
Now we'll tackle more about dismantling identities in those conversations. So thank you. Frank.
Okay.
Perfect.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
This has been a Gradients production.